Hi, my name's Brittney Nystrom, and I'm the Executive Director of the American Civil Liberties Union of Utah. I'm here today to talk about eternal vigilance being the price of liberty, and how nearly a century of defending liberty has readied the ACLU for today. What is the Bill of Rights? Here at the ACLU, we consider the Bill of Rights our primary client. But the Bill of Rights is a document that defines justice and describes the civil rights held by everyone in America. This document not only tells individuals that they have rights that no one, not even the government, can take away, but it also describes and checks the power of the government. The Bill of Rights houses some of our fundamental liberties and civil rights. The freedom of speech, for example, in the First Amendment. The right to be free from unlawful search and seizures from the government in the Fourth Amendment. And the right to rights, due process in the criminal justice system. The American Civil Liberties Union was founded in 1920, and at that time the Bill of Rights had not been tested in courts. It really was a series of words on an old piece of parchment paper that had questionable meaning to anyone's everyday lives. 130 years after the Bill of Rights had been adopted as part of our Constitution, racial segregation remained the law of the land. Lynchings were not only commonplace, they were carried out by police. And in 1920, thousands of Mexican immigrants had been arrested for their so-called radical beliefs, brutalized, and summarily deported to Mexico. This was the climate in which the ACLU was born. A small group of men and women got together and committed to fiercely defend the rights of everyone. They could not have been swimming more directly against the currents of their times. The American Civil Liberties Union of Utah is an affiliate of the national ACLU. We're your local chapter of the ACLU. And we were created in the 50s in the midst of anti-communist hysteria in the McCarthy era. Our local founders were committed to the concepts of freedom of speech, separation of church and state, and racial equality. Even though the ACLU is nearing its 100th anniversary and the ACLU of Utah is celebrating its 60th year this year, the ACLU is arguably needed now more than ever. Many Americans feel like the nation is teetering on the edge of committing some of our gravest sins against civil rights and civil liberties. The fear is real. On election night, so many people visited Canada's immigration website, it crashed. And a few days after President Trump took office, thousands of immigration attorneys, everyday Americans, community members rushed to the airports after the Muslim ban was announced. They went there to not only show support for, but offer assistance to travelers, refugees, immigrants arriving at our airports, regardless of their religion. Over our nation's short history, what it means to be an American, the rights and liberties that are guaranteed to us in our laws and constitutions have really been driven forward by individuals. And often it has been courageous individuals fighting for justice for everyone that have helped birth those rights. Typically, this stance taken by individuals has begun with the words, "I disagree," uttered defiantly to friends, to neighbors, to the media, to lawmakers, in a tweet to our president. This act of dissent is enshrined in our First Amendment. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. referred to the First Amendment as the right to protest for right. And individuals like those who have served as plaintiffs in many of our fundamental lawsuits really defining the rights held by Americans have done that to protect not only their rights, but the rights of vulnerable Americans facing government oppression. It has been individuals who have slowly eroded and toppled long-held beliefs, Jim Crow and slavery, the denial of the right to vote and the right to reproductive justice to women, denial of the right to marry someone of the same sex or someone of a different race. These views were at one time in our country all majority-held opinions, but have all subsequently toppled. There are a few sayings that are often evoked when talking about the work of the American Civil Liberties Union. Freedom cannot defend itself. Liberty dies first on the margins of society. And perhaps the saying that is most closely associated with our work, which comes from Thomas Jefferson, eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. This vigilance, this defending of freedom has never been easy. And we, as the American Civil Liberties Union, working for nearly a century, have found ourselves in battles not only decades ago, but today that seem to be repeating. For example, in the 1960s, the ACLU stood with civil rights groups when they were facing FBI surveillance in an effort to discourage activism and membership. Today, the ACLU stands with Black Lives Matter in opposing their surveillance by the Department of Homeland Security and in collaborating with them to challenge racism in our criminal justice system. When Mary Tinker wanted to wear a black armband to her high school in the 1960s to protest the war in Vietnam, the ACLU represented her. Today, we represent student activists who are organizing the March for Our Lives, facing disciplinary action targeting their exercise of free speech. And just as the ACLU represented Muhammad Ali in his conviction for draft evasion, the ACLU today represents student athletes who choose to kneel during the national anthem to protest police violence in a peaceful protest. The ACLU in Utah has grown in size and has grown in power. Over the past 60 years, we have challenged a multitude of unconstitutional government actions. These have included police sweeps in ethnic and minority communities. These have included improper blurring of the line between church and state through prayer at public meetings or public graduation ceremonies, opposition to same-sex marriage, to LGBTQ clubs meeting on public campuses, to adoption by non-traditional couples, substandard conditions of confinement in jails and prisons across the state of Utah. Just last month, the ACLU successfully increased the voting rights of Navajo living in San Juan County. They had faced linguistic barriers and other obstacles impeding their right to the vote. Just last week, we filed a lawsuit against federal law enforcement officers who battered their way into a home in Heber City, Utah, without producing a warrant, we feel in violation of the Fourth Amendment. The ACLU of Utah realizes we have come a long way in the past 60 years, but we have a long way to go to realizing the rights guaranteed us in our state constitution, our state statutes, as well as the Bill of Rights and national laws. Today, the ACLU is about 1.75 million members strong nationwide. We are a strictly nonpartisan organization. Truly, the Bill of Rights is our primary client, and we are funded entirely through private donations, accepting no government funding. How exactly do we go about this work of defending the Bill of Rights, of standing vigilant against encroaching on our liberty? We fight. We fight in courtrooms. We fight in city halls and county buildings. We fight in every state legislature, including the U.S. Congress, and we teach individuals about their rights and how to exercise them so they can fight with growing confidence. I should say that the ACLU today is present in all 50 states and Puerto Rico. Why should someone else's rights matter to you? I offer two examples for your consideration. The first, minority viewpoints are by definition unpopular. They are also the most prone to being snuffed out by the government. It's easiest to quell unpopular beliefs, and the ACLU has often stood with viewpoints or opinions that are not in the prevalent mindset. One example of our work today is representing female law enforcement officers who choose to become a parent or to breastfeed a child. Unfortunately, in many law enforcement agencies across the country, women are serving in a heavily male-dominated field and have faced discrimination and retaliation due to pregnancy or breastfeeding. This is occurring today despite laws that protect against discrimination on account of parental status or gender. It's also important to point out that minority viewpoints may become your opinion one day. You never know when something that you feel passionately about may find itself unpopular and prone to government shutdown. A second example is almost the reverse. Over time, widely held majority opinions have upheld systems of injustice. As views on equality, inclusion, racism has evolved over our country's history, we have fortunately seen some systems of injustice topple when that majority viewpoint is challenged by a brave individual or a courageous community with the audacity to say no more. Some examples include lynching, now being widely recognized as murder and punished appropriately, and a system of segregation in the South being stricken from the laws and replaced with a statutory scheme that prohibits discrimination on account of race, religion, gender identity, sexual orientation in places of public accommodation. The ACLU takes a lot of cases, and we win most of them. But that's not always the case, and we recognize that we might learn more from the cases that we lose. Just as a tech startup or an entrepreneur may find hard-fought lessons in a situation of failure, we also recognize that when we lose a case, we have a lot to learn. During World War II, the ACLU represented Fred Korematsu in challenging the United States of America's practice of interning Japanese Americans, including U.S. citizens, in places like Topaz, Utah. At the time, the president had declared a national security justification that required the detention of Japanese Americans. The ACLU felt otherwise, and we fought all the way to the United States Supreme Court, where we lost. In the ensuing decades, however, we feel we won that case in the court of public opinion. The case of Korematsu versus the United States is now widely regarded as a stain on the Supreme Court's record, and the U.S. Congress did pay reparations to survivors of the internment camps. However, today we find ourselves in a situation of suing the President of the United States for an act of blatant discrimination on the grounds of national security. President Trump has declared that millions of individuals from Muslim-majority countries cannot obtain visas to enter the United States because it's a national security risk. Within 24 hours, the ACLU had filed a lawsuit, and we have successfully blocked that ban from taking effect in front of every federal court that has so far heard the case. The Supreme Court is set to hear arguments on this case at the end of April, and the ACLU stands ready to take that case seriously and work to overturn what we feel is a violation of the First Amendment's prohibition on disfavoring a religion, here Islam, or discriminating against a whole category of individuals based on their national origin. So win or lose, you know we will be fighting to protect your civil rights, and we will continue to do so until we feel like the Bill of Rights is really reflecting what belongs to each and every one of us in the sense of individual rights in opposition to government power. Thank you very much.
Thank you.